Hello, everyone. Tonight, we're diving into a fascinating topic. Not a battle or a feast, but the peculiar and often pungent realm of medieval hygiene. Picture a time when bathing was seen as riskier than the plague. Garlic could be considered a decent substitute for perfume, and tossing unusual items out of the window was just a part of daily life. Before settling in, take a second to like the video and subscribe if you truly enjoy the content here. Also, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always fun to see the diverse places you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that comforting hum in the background, and let's journey back in time together. The phrase cleanliness is next to godliness wouldn't have made much sense in the 14th century. Surprisingly, during the early Middle Ages, bathing was actually a valued practice. Monasteries had baths, and remnants of Roman bathing traditions still lingered in parts of Europe. However, by the later medieval period, attitudes shifted dramatically. Bathing began to be seen as dangerous. Why the change? It all boiled down to fear, superstition, and some wildly incorrect ideas about how the human body functioned. People believed that warm water opened pores, supposedly making it easier for diseases to invade the body. Imagine living during a plague outbreak and fearing that taking a bath would turn you into a walking sponge for death. The medieval mindset around bathing was one of caution and fear. Frequent bathing, they believed, could weaken the body and even invite illness. Water, in their view, wasn't a source of cleanliness but a potential danger. By the 13th and 14th centuries, public bathhouses, once community hubs for hygiene, began to develop a more scandalous reputation. Some operated like spas, while others leaned more toward brothels. Unsurprisingly, church authorities eventually condemned bathing as sinful, leading to the closure of many bathhouses. As a result, people began to abandon bathing, not out of laziness or indifference to cleanliness, but because staying dry was seen as safer, more modest, and even holier. Being naked was one thing. Being naked in hot water, though, was practically an invitation for the devil to join in. This doesn't mean medieval folk were perpetually caked in dirt. They still practiced basic hygiene by washing their hands, faces, and feet with cloths and herbal rinses. However, full-body baths became rare, reserved only for the wealthy, the exceptionally daring, or the unbearably itchy. Their fear of bathing wasn't ignorance, but a well-intentioned, though misguided, attempt to stay healthy. Without knowledge of germs, plumbing, or basic microbiology, their approach was more about superstition than effective prevention. In earlier times, public bathhouses held a very different reputation. Inspired by lingering Roman traditions, these bathhouses were places of warmth, communal tubs, and even optimism, a kind of medieval spa day, minus the scented candles. People from all walks of life, including monks, merchants, and lower nobles, gathered there to relax, soak, and socialize. Cleanliness, for a fleeting moment in history, was both achievable and trendy. However, by the 13th century, these bathhouses had become infamous for their multitasking. Bathing shifted from being a hygienic ritual to a more social, and sometimes scandalous, activity. Some bathhouses began offering services beyond a simple soak, with overly attentive attendants and water that was far from fresh. This marked the beginning of the end for the public bathhouse as a pillar of cleanliness in medieval society. The line between wellness and waywardness blurred quickly in medieval bathhouses. What started as places of hygiene and relaxation soon gained a reputation for scandal. Public nudity, even with a loofah in hand, was frowned upon by the church, and a moral outcry over alleged sexual misconduct only made matters worse. Bathhouses became associated with sin, disease, and debauchery. When the Black Death arrived, people were more than willing to shut these establishments down. After all, a public tub couldn't spread the plague if it was boarded up and labeled morally corrupt. But it wasn't just fears of sin or illness that led to the decline of bathhouses. Bathing itself became suspect. Over time, soaking in warm water, especially alongside strangers, was seen as both physically and spiritually risky. Bathhouses gradually closed their doors, with some repurposed into bakeries and others left to decay. A fittingly ironic fate for places once meant to cleanse the body. Monks and monasteries mourned the loss, as many had long upheld hygienic traditions, including routine bathing. However, even these practices came under scrutiny. The church didn't outright ban cleanliness, but made it increasingly difficult to maintain. Thus began the era of medieval dry cleaning. Soap became optional, water was eyed with suspicion, and bathhouses faded into history as relics of a time when bathing was not yet a moral or health hazard. Despite the church's growing disapproval of bare skin and the belief that a hot bath could open pores to disease, medieval people didn't completely abandon hygiene. They adapted, relying on dry methods and minimal water use to keep themselves presentable in a world where scrubbing had become a risky business. Medieval people didn't entirely give up on bathing. They just redefined it into a rare event, save for when the smell could no longer be ignored. Let's start with the nobility. Yes, the wealthy did bathe, though not frequently enough to wear out their wooden tubs. Without indoor plumbing, servants hauled boiling water into a wooden tub lined with linen. Herbs like lavender, sage, or anything nearby that didn't reek of barnyard were added to the mix, turning the bath into a kind of aromatic stew. These baths were often set up in bedrooms or near fireplaces, with privacy depending entirely on one's rank or shamelessness. Some couples even shared a bath, because what's more romantic than soaking together in a medieval version of broth? The less fortunate bathed too, but in rivers, barrels, or whatever held water and wasn't home to something with teeth. For them, bathing wasn't about cleanliness as much as multitasking. Washing the child, the laundry, and perhaps the family goat all at once was a common practice. During winter, however, survival took precedence over hygiene. Instead of bathing, people opted for the pretend you're clean and carry on approach. In urban areas, especially in southern Europe, a few public bathhouses persisted. These were sometimes well-maintained, offering steam rooms and herbal treatments. Other times, they moonlighted as venues for activities that would raise an eyebrow at the Vatican. Whether you left feeling rejuvenated or judged depended on the establishment. For major life events like childbirth or recovering from illness, full baths were still a thing. A barrel of lukewarm water infused with rosemary was considered just the ticket to welcome a new baby or ward off death. However, when full immersion fell out of favor due to fears that hot water opened pores to disease, medieval folks turned to an alternative, the humble sponge bath, or their version of it. With a cloth, a bit of water, and a healthy dose of determination, they managed to keep just clean enough to avoid total chaos. Medieval people didn't have the luxury of modern sponges. Instead, they used linen cloths soaked in warm water, herbal infusions, or vinegar, wiping themselves down as if polishing a fragile antique. Hygiene in this era was more about strategic dabbing than thorough scrubbing. Nobles, if fortunate, could have someone else do the dabbing for them, though the enthusiasm of the helper likely depended on their station. These partial washes focused on high-traffic areas: the hands, face, armpits, and occasionally feet. Underclothing, such as linen shirts and shifts, played a surprisingly critical role in maintaining a semblance of cleanliness. These layers absorbed sweat and grime, meaning that swapping out your undershirt was about as close to modern hygiene as one could get. While outer garments might grow stiff with dirt, at least your base layer could be freshly laundered. It wasn't ideal, but in a world where baths were suspect and water often scarce, it was the safest option available. Without deodorant, toothpaste, or showers, a cloth soaked in rose water or vinegar became the medieval version of self-care, albeit a far cry from today's spa treatments. Wealthier individuals might enjoy the luxury of attendants heating water, adding fragrant herbs like rosemary or marjoram, and performing a gentle wash while suppressing their opinions. Peasants followed a similar process but boiled their water over open fires and ladled it into bowls for a more DIY approach, minus the opulence, but with added drafts. Monks, meanwhile, often had a more regimented approach to hygiene. Many monastic orders mandated regular washing, though the practice leaned more towards spiritual discipline than sanitation. Regardless of the method, the results were generally the same: A quick wipe down, a faint sheen of moisture, and just enough cleanliness to avoid startling anyone nearby. Livestock might not have been phased, but medieval hygiene was far from glamorous. It got the job done, at least until you rode 6 hours through mud on horseback. When it came to hair care, the motto could easily have been flammable but fragrant. Contrary to popular belief, people didn't intentionally let their hair turn into matted bird nests. They did wash their hair, albeit infrequently and with products that sounded like ingredients from a wizard's potion book. A common option was lye soap, made from wood, ash, and animal fat. Effective for removing grease, it was also harsh enough to strip your scalp and sometimes your dignity. For those who value their hairline, egg yolks offered a gentler alternative, though this meant enduring the joy of raw egg dripping down your neck in a cold hut. Beer rinses were another favorite, doubling as a lice treatment and a reason to smell like a tavern, even if you'd been home all day. Vinegar rinses infused with rosemary or lavender were also popular, masking unpleasant odors while giving the illusion of effort. But let's not kid ourselves. No one was doing the modern lather, rinse, repeat routine. Washing was a quick splash and squeeze operation, with lukewarm water being the ideal choice, if you had fuel to heat it and the patience to wait for a turn with the bucket. Hair brushing, on the other hand, was more common. Combs made from bone, wood, or horn were widely used and often intricately carved, offering a touch of elegance in an otherwise itchy existence. Long, well-kept hair was a point of pride, especially for noble women who spent hours braiding, coiling, and veiling their locks, while praying that an errant fireplace spark wouldn't turn their hard work into kindling. Dental care, meanwhile, was less about sparkling smiles and more about keeping most of your teeth intact. Medieval folks didn't fully grasp oral hygiene, but they made do with what they had, limited though it might have been done all day in a suit of unwashed wool. It wasn't just that medieval people smelled, it was that everything smelled. Streets reeked of open sewers, livestock wandered freely, and waste was casually tossed out of windows. The aroma of life in medieval Europe was quite literally inescapable. How they managed. 1. Pomanders. These are the go-to for anyone who could afford them. These small, hollow orbs, often beautifully crafted, were filled with aromatic herbs and spices like cloves, cinnamon, or lavender. They served as personal air fresheners, masking odors with a cloud of pleasant scents. Wealthy individuals carried them on chains or tucked them into clothing as a subtle, or not so subtle, statement of refinement. 2. Scented sachets. Ladies, in particular, wore small sachets of herbs in their bodices to mask body odor and fend off the ambient stench. These sachets doubled as accessories and pest repellents, ensuring the wearer smelled like a meadow, even if they were surrounded by muck. 3. Herbs and hair. Rosemary, marjoram, or other aromatic plants were sometimes braided into hair, creating a fragrant halo. This was both practical and fashionable, making every head toss a moment of olfactory delight. 4. Imported perfumes. For the wealthy, perfumes imported from the Middle East or Italy were a luxurious solution. Made from ingredients like rose oil, musk, or civet, extracted from a civet cat in a process that was undoubtedly awkward for all involved. These scents added an air of mystery and sophistication. Application was an art form, involving careful dabs and swishes to maintain just the right level of allure. 5. Environmental tolerance. For everyone else, it was about survival. Open sewers and butcher shop scraps were just part of the background, like the hum of traffic in modern cities. People accepted the stench as part of life, finding solace in the fact that everyone shared the same olfactory plight. The church's take. While spiritual cleanliness was prioritized, physical cleanliness was less emphasized. If you smelled decent, it was assumed you were either exceptionally wealthy or touched by divine favor. For everyone else, smelling bad wasn't a personal failing. It was just Tuesday's oh yes, the medieval world smell, but they did their best with what they had. And perhaps, in a way, the collective stink fostered a sense of camaraderie. After all, nothing says community like shared suffering, especially when it's scented with garlic and regret. Medieval dentistry wasn't exactly advanced. If a tooth was rotting or infected, the solution was quick and brutal. A firm grip, a prayer, and a swift yank. No numbing agents, just raw courage. To numb the pain, some people rinsed their mouths with wine and hoped for the best. Surprisingly, many medieval folks still had decent teeth, thanks to diets low in processed sugar. Rural communities, in particular, often had better dental health than today's snack-loving population. However, when decay set in, it spread quickly, and no homemade remedy could save you. Divine intervention seemed like the only hope. If you found yourself wandering through a busy medieval town, your first reaction wouldn't be amazement. It would be holding your breath. The lack of sewage systems, deodorant, and frequent baths turned the streets into a sensory overload. Sweaty bodies, livestock, rotting food, and other odors combined to create a truly unforgettable atmosphere. Surviving the stench of the fish market and passing the tanner's workshop without gagging was an accomplishment in itself. To combat the overwhelming smells, people got inventive. Enter the pomander, a small, hollow ball filled with aromatic herbs and spices like cloves, cinnamon, and lavender. Worn around the neck or tucked into clothing, it worked like a medieval air freshener, overpowering rather than eliminating odors. Women often carried scented sachets in their dresses or braided fragrant herbs like rosemary into their hair, blending hygiene, style, and a hint of superstition. For the wealthy, imported perfumes offered an extra touch of luxury. These fragrances, made from rose oil or civet musk, harvested from a not-so-happy animal, added an air of sophistication, masking the scent of everyday life, including boiled turnips and regret. But the environment didn't help matters. Open sewers, livestock, smoke from candles, and discarded scraps from butchers created a persistent cloud of unpleasantness. Yet, people rarely complained. Everyone shared the same nasal struggles. It was a communal experience, bonded by the knowledge that nobody really smelled great. If you've ever forgotten deodorant for a day and nervously checked yourself, imagine living like that every day, with no deodorant and no hope of relief. In medieval towns, smelling bad was just part of fitting in the Middle Ages. Body odor wasn't just a side effect of daily life. It was practically a badge of honor. With no deodorant sticks, sprays, or even a hint of antiperspirant technology, sweating was unavoidable, and most people simply learned to live with it. Or at least, they tried to combat the ever-present musk. Folks turned to a few DIY solutions. Alum powder, a mineral salt with mild antibacterial properties, was a popular choice. While it didn't stop you from sweating, it did reduce the smell, if you remember to use it and didn't mind rubbing gritty powder into your underarms. Other methods included rinsing with vinegar or applying crushed herbs like sage, mint, or rosemary. These didn't exactly eliminate odor, but at least you smelled like a garden instead of a week-old stew. For the wealthy, perfumed handkerchiefs were the ultimate accessory. Nobles carried these scented cloths to hold discreetly under their noses while braving the crowded, odorous streets. The goal wasn't to smell great, just to smell better than most. Unfortunately, that still meant sweaty with a hint of flowers. Medieval medicine wasn't much help either. Physicians believed sweating was essential for expelling bad humors, and blocking it was considered both suspicious and unhealthy. In their view, the more you sweated and smelled, the better your body was cleansing itself. Being fragrant wasn't a hygiene failure. It was practically a medical achievement. Fashion only made things worse. Layers of wool, linen, and fur trapped heat and sweat, turning clothing into personal saunas. If you ever found yourself wrapped in wool for days, you didn't just wear your outfit, you marinated in it. And so, the Middle Ages became a time when body odor wasn't a flaw. It was just life, particularly among monks or anyone who could pull off a bald look. Removing all hair was a drastic but effective way to cut ties with lice. Occasionally, a wig would be worn over the freshly shaved head, though wigs had their own risks, serving as a cozy, portable lice motel if not properly maintained. Still, the strategy was straightforward. No hair, no vermin. Fleas were another unwelcome companion, thriving in straw mattresses and animal-filled surroundings. Without modern flea collars or sprays, people relied on smoke fumigation and herbal sachets tucked into bedding. Some believed the right scents could drive fleas away. Others probably just crossed their fingers, hoping the pest would jump to someone else. In the end, the real solution was simply to endure. Itching and scratching were as much a part of daily life as taxes, death, or stepping in something unpleasant near the market stalls. Speaking of unpleasantness, let's talk toilets, or the medieval approximation thereof. The term toilet feels generous for the era, where bathroom breaks were less about comfort and more about improvisation and tolerance for unsanitary conditions. Castles, for example, boasted garderobes, stone alcoves with a wooden seat and a direct drop into the moat or a pit below. If you were lucky, gravity did most of the work. If not, well, the smell and potential hazards were constant reminders of medieval engineering limitations. For common folk, the options were even bleaker. Open ditches, chamber pots, or designated corners served as facilities, often emptied directly into the streets. It was a system that ensured no one needed to ask where the bathroom was. They could follow their nose. While the elite might escape to their drafty garderobes, the masses faced a much less glamorous reality, relying on practicality and hope.